Welcome to the live weekly update. It is May 20th, 2026. And I am going to give you an update. It's been a really intense week for me since the last update. I'm wearing my gardening outfit. I was out this morning pulling weeds and doing a little bit of yard work because it's been rainy and the soil is very saturated, so it makes it all easy. But that all fits my tone right now. My energy has been the kind of saturated that comes with a heavy rainfall. And maybe it's the astrology. It's been a lot in the past several days. But it's a lot with my body too. And the privilege that I have in my life is that I have had the space and the conditions to be able to get really practiced in listening to my body, what I need, and really tapping into my feelings. So in the past several days, I've had pretty intense feelings. And it's actually, I want to talk about that because I have had also numerous conversations. This is the other thing. I live a very, I think some people would expect my life to be very isolated because I do have a lot of alone time. Honestly, I like that because it is where I'm in my process all the time and doing my work. But I'm not lonely because I have many people in my life who I connect with, who I talk with. I've got beautiful friends, and even people who are not close friends or we hang out all the time and do stuff. I have been so fortunate, really, to be cultivating a community of people around me who have very similar attitudes and values and practices and just ways of showing up and being human. I was, recently I was kind of struck with a shock of being not everybody's like that. I have truly managed to curate a lovely little bubble, which I know is not realistic in the sense of that's not representative of how the majority of the world is. It is a very privileged place to be too, that I don't have to interact with people I don't really want to interact with. And instead I have been able to build relationships and connections with people who are people I want to have in my life. So I'm saying all this because, for a lot of reasons, you know the drill. These are usually pretty meandering kind of updates, but this one in particular because I've been doing some very deep work in the past, I'm going to say, 7 days, but 6 days in particular. And I'll give you an update or a summary of kind of what that's looked like. But ultimately, the intention for today for me is to kind of introduce what I have titled this as insights on intimacy, work in progress, because that's what I'm doing. The work in progress is developing the epistemology of intimacy, and it is kind of always on my mind, but a lot has happened in the past week or so giving me some insights about that. And it comes from conversations, it comes from deep feelings, it comes from the space of being alone and being able to go really deep. And it comes from just my reflections on how I'm connecting and moving through the world. So let me start by kind of orienting a little bit on the week. I want to say something too that I realized not too long ago. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but it was very recently, really recently, that I realized that these updates, which I record live on a weekly basis on Substack, actually can be downloaded and listened to as a podcast. So I didn't know that I've been making a podcast the whole time. I did recently make it more available on some platforms once I was like, oh, people are downloading this and just listening to that. My friend told me. She was like, I listen to it when I'm blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I didn't know you could do that. In my mind, I guess I just thought everybody had to sit at their computer, open up their email, and then watch me talk for an hour. But I'm glad to know that you can actually download the recording. You can watch it, or you can just listen to the audio, which means that basically I've been inadvertently making a podcast of just me talking for many months now, like months and months and months. And I like that. So I'm gonna lean into that now. But true to form, I've also been, in my head coming up with all these schemas for how to structure and categorize my different projects and what I'm doing to keep it straight, clear for me and focused. And what I keep returning to is that this space, the live weekly update, is really a place for me to do just that, like to give an update. I know I've kind of waffled a little bit on whether or not I should be processing my thoughts in real time. But it's weird because if I'm just like talking to a camera, it's not your typical podcast structure where there's like a guest and an interview and a conversation. But I guess I just have a lot to say. And so far, now that I've leaned into the hour and 15-minute window, which is typically how long these go, I'm just gonna go for it. So let me do a little interruption of myself and talk about podcasts, because for this podcast, that's what I'm calling it now. For the live weekly update, which could also be on YouTube, these go to my YouTube channel too. But as the update, I think I'm gonna try to stay true to like the what is happening in my process, because I want to be really candid and say there's not a performance here. There might be something happening philosophically, but I'm not trying to like create an experience, like I'm not trying to create a container where there's anything more than just me truly talking and sharing. That's important because I am considering right now making more kinds of spaces and containers where it could be crafted as a different kind of experience, in the vein more leaning towards a performance of sorts. And performance is always really loose for me there because, I think about performance and performativity and the connections of what that means in terms of the doing and the being. And so maybe it's blurry. The lines are always blurry. That's okay. But anyway, this space update, tell you what's been going on for the past week since. And the other thing about the podcast realization is funny is that if you don't know, I have a long history here of podcasting thanks to my best friend. Back in 2010, maybe 2011, we basically started a podcast where we were like, we just love our conversations. We have a lot of fun. They're sometimes pretty interesting and sometimes not. They're just like us chatting about nothing, but what if other people would be interested in hearing this? So we started recording our conversations, and it was like the early days of podcasting before many people were podcasting at all. And we were like, we're just going to sit and bullshit and talk. And we had a great time. And now, thanks to my foray into trying to contact Mae Martin, I have been listening to the Handsome podcast more regularly just to kind of like stay informed, I guess. But I was initially really surprised at how truly that podcast is just Tig, Fortune, and May chatting and giving updates. Like, what are you doing this week? Oh, Fortune's taking mom to an appointment. Like, there's something interesting about that I want to talk about, because I am still kind of making sense of the past few weeks, a month or so, of my effort to make pages and write a letter and contact May, in the hope of eventually finding a collaboration to do something around an epistemology of intimacy. But I'm going to say all this. So anyway, first things first, I guess this is a podcast now, and it's just me talking to you, whoever you are, because I'm not having guests with interviews and questions. I am giving updates. This is not a performance. This is truly documenting my process kind of along the way, though I will likely create new and additional spaces, always experimenting on spaces for a different kind of engagement and a different kind of experience. That's not what this is. I do have a history of podcasting with my friends, so I'm kind of excited to do this. We don't have that podcast anymore. It used to be called Rats and Cats. It was just so much fun and so ridiculous. So while this is not a Rats and Cats revival, this is like the cat revival. I was the cat. I am leaning into this like, "Oh, if this is just a podcast, then maybe I can do more with this," because sharing verbally is a lot easier for me than sharing in writing, even though I'm making my pages. Quick cut into that. I'm still feeling way too full. A chronic experience in my life. Um, the too fullness is that there's so much always happening, and I have so much that I want to get out that actually writing my pages, even typing out blog posts or Substack newsletters or whatever, publishing written, typed, textual, font words is really slow for my process. There's too much. And I'm feeling this like kind of like the way I describe it, like a river in high season. There's a lot of volume here, which means a lot of flow and a lot of force and velocity too. So I'm trying to figure out ways to get that out faster. And I might actually just lean more into the videos now that I know that I can do that. But it'll be different from the live weekly update if I do. Anyway, side note. Other thing, the Handsome podcast, again, I'm just reviewing everything I've said now. The idea of people like comedians, celebrities, being real friends and just having a conversation that becomes this like very well recognized, extremely popular podcast, captured my attention, particularly because I was already primed now for thinking about the epistemology of intimacy project and what that could look like with someone like May. I'm going to tell you a little bit of what happened since then, because now, update on my life, what has transpired. Last week in the live, I was telling the magical story of how my pages got to May on May 8th. I hope. I think. Let's wish. So if it's true that my printed pages got to May Martin and in their possession, then fantastic. There was so much that went into that being able to happen. And the like unfolding of that was beautiful and lovely and super magical. But in my life last week, I recorded that magical unfolding story. And I also stayed up all night, like making sure that I could hit the astrology on the Thursday, the next day, and actually put it all out there. But by putting it all out there, I not only did I include the magical unfolding story, I also included the live weekly update from the week prior when I'm wearing like my red sweater, talking about the pages that I wrote for May and just kind of like, moving through them. That was when I wasn't actually even sure how or if I was going to get them to May. But in that red sweater live update, I told more of like the story of my first dissertation idea and how I'm going to have to be my own Nietzsche, and kind of set up a little bit more. Someone who follows me wrote like, this is a deep dive into the foundations of my thought from 15 years ago. And he wrote the comment like, thus spoke Cori, which I think was cute and funny because when I said I'm going to have to be my own Nietzsche, that is a clear reference to Nietzsche's beautiful book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So anyway, there's a lot that I want to kind of like unpack there, maybe eventually to around even the prologue of Zarathustra. But anyway, where was I going? Okay, so I gave the red sweater update of here are my pages that I made for May. I put so much effort into them, and I'm just telling you what that happens now. Next week, oh my gosh, they've gotten to May Martin. Presumably, let's hope and see what happens. Here's the magical unfolding of how that all went. So now this is the third week of a series of talking about these pages to May. And I did say last week, I was like, now my project's done. Like, I'm not going to reach out any longer. I'm not doing anything. And I wanted to be really clear about that. Like, I sat with how much I shared, because on Thursday with the astrology, Channy Nicholas, who approved of my plan on social media. Now, if you have listened at all, you know I talk about Channy all the time, and I freaked out when Channy like applauded my story. It was like, oh my god, there's more contact with these people who, I'm like, so me personally, parasocially connected to at this point. Channy is for sure someone who I have a deep parasocial relationship with because I have listened to her voice and her astrology, like guidance, her readings for now from her book 6 years, but from the app multiple years, and it's like a daily thing for me. So Channy's like my right hand person in all my decision making at this point. Um anyway, because I put so much out last Thursday to try to hit the astrology marker, which was Channy's advice, I ended up publishing in a way that I usually don't. And that means I recorded my live and then put it out, like the magical unfolding, put it out the next day, maybe that night. On Thursday, I put out clips of that. And then I also put out so many clips of the long recorded, I'm in my red sweater. This is the history of what I'm doing. Here's what all these pages were proposing for May Martin. And here's really the project and all this. Truly a deep dive. But I dumped all of that onto social media on Thursday and was like, ugh, ew, that feels weird. Because I don't typically do that. And maybe it's all of these things, plus me saying like, okay, I'm done. That's like the end of my project in terms of reaching out to someone like May Martin. That really got me thinking more about the like parasocial dynamic. And I realized that if I'm going to do the epistemology of intimacy, like for sure, this has to engage in some degree of analysis around parasocial relationships. This isn't surprising. I'm just kind of like a little bit surprised that I didn't see it being so central before. But at this point now, I can say that for sure, the parasocial dynamic is really truly kind of at the heart of a lot of my questions around intimacy. And again, I'm being loose on parasocial. Typically, classically, it is understood by like a kind of definitional characterization of a one-way emotional investment in some kind of presumed bond that one person has with another person, often with a celebrity or somebody else of a different kind of social status or visibility, so that the other person doesn't know that the one who has this like emotional attachment or some kind of personal investment in this other person or the connection that they feel towards them, the other person doesn't know that this one exists. So that's a classic way of thinking about parasocial. One way with a lack of knowledge coming from the person who's like sort of the object of someone's attachment. Now, I don't like parasocial relationships in general. They do tend to make me uncomfortable, but that is kind of a core and I think really illuminating framework for thinking about intimacy, because it just makes me start to wonder and question like, well, then what truly is intimacy, or with whom do we have a deeper kind of relationship when we can't just take for granted that like, I know you, you know me, we know that each other exist. That doesn't necessarily grant or guarantee any degree of emotional investment or attachment, or even the felt sense of like connection, however that goes. So I'm being vague right now because that can be unpacked at length in a bit. But I'm staying at the surface of that right now because I'm trying to think about what all this means for May Martin, because I felt so weird putting on social media and still tagging May. I was like, I said I was going to be done, but I guess now I'm done. Now that I've put it all out there and I've dumped all these clips of me explaining what the whole project was and the magical unfolding, just because maybe they'd be interested in hearing that story of how the pages got to them. Now I'm done. And a really weird thing happened. I'm skipping a couple of days, but on this theme, over the weekend, someone on Instagram who I do not know, and just, a random person, presumably, I guess, saw the post that I tagged May in and then sent me a DM that was like, you probably know this, but May is on vacation with Parvati. And like, okay, let me just say, what? I was so uncomfortable with this message for so many reasons. And now I'm thinking about May. And I'm thinking about what it must be like to be someone like May, like not just them, but like anybody who's visible celebrity status, has fandom, and also on podcasts ends up sharing things in a very familiar, personal, casual kind of way where we're not talking about like analysis of like social dynamics or geopolitics, but like people are just giving updates on their lives. That breeds a sense of familiarity and closeness, kind of like a personal connection because the information is so just like everyday and personal with the people who are listening to it. So this person who sent me a DM is clearly a Mae Martin fan. And they, I'm assuming, saw my posts about the pages getting to Mae because I tagged Mae. Then they send me this DM that's like, hey, Mae's on vacation with this person who is like their ex-partner now, was engaged. I don't know. I'm not in all this personal stuff. Again, it's not how I roll. But I was so uncomfortable because I wanted to write back and be like, how and why do you know that? Why do you know someone's vacation plans? And also, why would you think it's appropriate at all to tell another person? I mean, like, be super questionable whether it's appropriate for someone to know how and why a celebrity's personal vacation plans, traveling and their company. Unless, and I listened to the Handsome podcast because I was like, maybe Mae said this and was like, oh, I'm going on vacation after my tour. I was trying to give the benefit of the doubt and hope that maybe this is something Mae had disclosed on their own. And it wasn't like a weird, creepy kind of thing. Like, really, no, seriously, how do you know that information? And why? Why do you know it? So I'm starting to feel like uncomfortable, maybe like a little like pseudo parasocially protective of Mae, but it was just this like I was so unsettled by the fact that someone knew this, but then adding on to it the layers of like, why would you tell me that? Like, even you don't know who I am, but also this is not information that I think anybody should be privy to, let alone share. So it was on a DM. I'm glad they didn't like put it in a comment or something, but like it was odd to me and it really made me feel funny. So that's a super long-winded way to say that like I was confronted with this like bizarre, seemingly, I'm sure this person feels like a benign and innocuous kind of interaction, but the threshold of like personal and private is weird. Now I'm not going to get into like the whole feminist historical discourse or like the racialized histories of what is personal and what is private or what is public and private. Even when it comes to like professional stuff, that's complicated. But I know that me personally, I'm also sort of towing that line between what is public and what is personal, in the sense of, do we put our personal things out for the public, which means anybody can see it and anybody has access to that. That fundamentally funkifies our sort of relational dynamics that we have with strangers. This is why therapy is so helpful because I, have been thinking a lot about vulnerability. And this is not news because I've been saying it for the past couple of months, especially when the question of intimacy and vulnerability and authenticity and being public or sharing with anybody, whether that's in a like more enclosed kind of closer circle or it's just broad out to like the ether of the internet and who knows who's going to intercept that. There's a lot of moving parts that create this sort of complex web of all these different factors that mean like who's going to engage, how are they going to engage, and then what are the impacts of that connection with us. Sometimes, we hope, ideally, I think the majority of people who share are hoping to find a connection or be able to connect with people in a meaningful way that, let's be idealistic here, allows us to feel less alone, that helps us understand our experiences better, that gives a sense that like, you're not an anomaly and maybe can fortify us for our experiences and deepen our connections with other people, building a more meaningful life and richer communities. That'd be lovely. But the other thing is that when you put it all out there, some people are weird. And this doesn't just have to be on the internet, but like people can feel a sense of closeness, proximity, intimacy, connection that becomes unhealthy, to say the least, because it is so wildly parasocially informed, where people end up having their own stories and projections and narratives that they put on to people, that becomes this like whole reality that is completely one-sided. So this again can happen not just on the internet, it can happen in our personal relationships too. And that is like, that's a foggy, hazy, liminal space in between. Like, what do we mean when we say real, authentic, meaningful connection and intimate relationship? And how do we differentiate that from just the wildly layered projections that so many of us have, that we put on other people and that other people put on us, that become these like kind of, I'm thinking like disco ball mirrors, like so many refracted projections and reflections back of what people want to see in us, or the ways that we want to see others, consciously or not. So anyway, I'm deep in it. Very deep in it. And it's not just because of me being uncomfortable with like the overwhelming download that I gave of all these clips of all my videos and then tagging May and feeling weird about it. Or it's not just because of the DM that I got from a stranger about May that felt like so wildly inappropriate and like uncomfortable. But it is also about like our everyday lives, and I'm thinking about it for myself because I'm doing this sharing and I'm doing this processing, and I'm me personally, I'm consciously choosing to lean into this dimension of sharing in my process. I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it like fully conscious, eyes wide open. It's very much like Zarathustra in the way that Nietzsche talks about like the tightrope walk. Like I am, one might say, willing my own down going. Because some people will say, don't even put it out there. It's like too unsafe. And there are a lot of risks involved. I know that. But there's also potential reward in the sense of the value that I'm hoping can also be cultivated, if not just illuminated and said and pointed to today, maybe this is a possibility for us too. So the possibilities I'm always going for are those of a more meaningful, intimate kind of connection that allows us to have a deeper level of knowing and understanding of ourselves and each other and our place in the world, so that we can do something about it. That last part is so important. Let me pause there as I'm thinking through this, because there's a long history. Like if you were to go back and find some of the stuff that I've talked about, or the way that I describe my work, or the way that I've talked about philosophy for decades and why I love it, there's a recurring kind of phrasing that I have used for so long. We're on 20 years now of me saying this. And it's like, good theory or really good philosophy is so transformative because it gives us a lens through which we can understand ourselves and each other and our place in the world, so that we can figure out better ways to like be responsible for making the world a better place. Becoming better people, acting within the conditions that we have from a place of like critical understanding, like deeper critical thinking, to be able to see how all of this operates. I still stand by that. I really, really do. And then there's this other little layer in the way that I've been talking about not just theory, but like the connections, the relationships, and what comes from this kind of intimate place of understanding ourselves and each other, which is that in the conditions that we exist, which I think are getting more exacerbated, we are in conditions that are intended and designed to keep us separated, isolated, and alone from each other. That stokes fear and discomfort and alienation and isolation. All of those things become more rife conditions for things like fascism and violence, and the downfall of like humanity. I believe in a world more where our future is one where we are connected, where we are able to be in close relationship with each other, and because of that, we can now better support one another. Now we're going 10 years ago, more than that, but ish. When I was talking about feminist friendship as a kind of political practice, or a practice of political resistance, there are always two layers of that too, which is, the first layer is just that in the conditions that are meant to keep us separate from one another, finding true connection is itself a resistance strategy. Like, when people say existence is resistance, it's like when the systems want you to be gone, just surviving is your own form of defiance. So just connecting can also be a sort of rebellion, because it's like, no, fuck you. We're not going to be separate from each other. We're going to connect, and we're going to make this a meaningful relationship. I do think that's worthwhile, definitely. I find it important and valuable. That's so much of like a good motivation for putting ourselves in places and spaces and doing the work so that we can connect, because I do think it is that valuable. And also, a second layer is that it's not just the connection itself, though beautiful, but when we are able to connect with each other, we can actually learn so much more about ourselves and each other. We can learn about even the systems that like shape our relationships in our lives. We can have a different level of understanding that comes from and through those close, deeper bonds of true intimate connection. And that's the knowledge that it like opens onto, that I believe can be used to now cultivate very different forms of resistance. That's a way to shape solidarity. That's a way to shape more liberatory strategies for how to build differently in a world that is like run by a death cult. So 2 layers. Yes, the connection matters because these conditions are shit for it. But when we have an intimate, close connection with other people, and we have that much intimacy, that much trust, that much of a true, authentic bond, we can get to a different level of safety and security, yes, and understanding and insight, that then we can let that be the ground from which we build alternative ways of being in the world, being in community, being in family dynamics, like being in relationship with one another. And that to me is always like a more powerful and stronger kind of goal, because it's not just fighting oppression, but it's actually now like creating and building the alternatives, like how the world could be otherwise, and maybe how the world could inevitably be. But it's coming from a different source, and that source is truly the strength and power and the wisdom and the beauty and the insight and the magic and the healing and the safety of the relationships that we have around us. Okay, so that was a tangent. I guess the reason why I'm kind of allowing myself to go on that little digression is because I wanted to be really clear why the intimacy matters so much to me. The epistemology of intimacy is truly, I hope you can hear it now, the epistemology is like how we know what we know. What can we know by being intimate? The other piece about an epistemology of intimacy is also just this like kind of exploration of intimacy itself. Like, what is the nature of intimacy? And what is and isn't intimate? I'm getting a phone call. What is and isn't intimate, and then like how does our experience of intimacy, or even just like closeness or something, like how does that impact our relationships and our sense of reality, or our view of the world and our imaginative possibilities at all? So the epistemology of intimacy is grounded in like the true significance of why I think it's so important for us to be able to connect. I'm not even touching on, because I've done it before, but I'm not even touching on like the political and like economic and social implications of all of this, given the trajectory that we're on. I mean, seriously, the machines, technology and techno-fascism is like really, really, really kind of a big deal that I think puts a little bit more urgency or pressure on like why we need to develop the epistemology of intimacy. Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about that, and let me summarize kind of the upshot of all this. I'm thinking about it because I spent so much time saying, I want to talk to Mae Martin. And then I was like, I'm not done. But then I'm starting to think about like, what does that really look like in terms of a parasocial thing? Basically, I know I still don't know Mae. I really don't know if this would be a good collaboration or not. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm trying to not project so much onto a person who I truly do not know. And there's like room for emergence, there's room for learning along the way, which is why I'm so grateful for the process itself, regardless of what happens, because through this whole process, I truly have like moved differently and created differently and opened onto next steps that I like otherwise wouldn't be arriving at. So that's how that all goes. Okay, but let me tell you then what happened. So Thursday, Jesus, we're 40 minutes in and I only got to Thursday. Yikes. Okay, so Thursday, I dump all of these clips from the last two live streams. Friday, then, I had therapy and I had dinner with a friend. Um, and I'm trying to think, like, I know that in therapy, I was thinking about like the parasocial connection and how much that was going to come up. I had a really good dinner with a friend too, which had me thinking a lot about philosophy itself. And I'm trying to think, I was going to share something. I guess I will, because I'm just here and my brain can't move on now. He said something to me in the dinner, which was, he was like referencing something he heard from Martha Nussbaum, where she said that like to do philosophy is really to be even more naked in front of people if you're really, really doing it. And I think the way that it should be done. I am not very familiar with a ton of Martha Nussbaum's work. I know some of her stuff and have brought it into different kind of touch points in my philosophical life. But the fun part is that actually this friend of mine, God, I'm like, something's going on. This friend of mine, we actually met in a global ethics class where we were talking about human rights. And so we met probably while learning about Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach back in like the 90s, 2000s. Anyway, Martha Nussbaum, what I know of her is the therapy of desire, which was kind of this like Hellenistic approach, like the old Western philosophers approaching philosophy as the therapy of the soul. And so it makes sense to me that one way of approaching philosophy is less scientific and research based, kind of like we're studying the material and doing this like deep dive into much more like what you might think is like scholarly kind of research into much more the practice and the art of living, which is to help us live better and differently. So a therapy of the soul, therapy of desire, however you phrase it. In that way, I totally get why one would think that the philosophy we do would become so much an exposure of ourselves such that it might feel like we're standing naked in front of people. Because as another one of my key influencers in my life, I think this was a conversation I had with my advisor, Shannon Sullivan, in grad school. I remember how it went, and we were talking about, Nietzsche, or she brought up Kant. I'm not sure, but the phrase is basically that like people study their own shit, and I do believe that that's very much true. So there's a certain degree of like self-disclosure, even if it's conscious or not conscious, that I think gets, kind of displayed just by the very nature of the questions that we are inclined to ask. Why are we inclined to ask them? Probably because we feel them on some level. Now, if you're making jumps to connect the implications of what I've said, then yes, I am very much aware that my own questions around intimacy and what it means to be in truly deep, close, authentic bonds of understanding, care, and support with people are coming from my own shit. No surprise to me, but if you're just now realizing that, like, hey, welcome to the party. I know that part of me has been a little bit nervous about that. Be like, am I that messed up that like this is a question that has now become my sole project and like the central focus of my life and everything. And I think that there's a lot that one could say about like what it means to just truly embrace our questions. Now this is a little bit of the shadowy side of things, because when I talk about Chani Nicholas and what I've learned from the astrology and everything that is like helped me choose my path differently in the past 5 years. Part of that is by, like, understanding the significance of radical self-acceptance, and what I love about, like, Chani's work is that there's a really detailed profile based on your birth chart. And you can be like, "That's general still, everybody can read into anything," and I wouldn't say you're wrong in that, but it's a helpful lens that we can use to mirror back to ourselves whatever actually becomes meaningful and significant. So there's still so much interpretation that I think is, like, our doing that makes it relevant, if you're willing to own it, like, this is how I understand that for myself. So in my progress of learning about my own self to be able to radically accept, part of what that comes with is this very helpful presentation of Chani in terms of challenges and gifts. And one might say, like, these are the hard things, then these are, like, the really wonderful, fortunate blessings that we might find, or our good luck in the meantime, or things that are working well for us. The challenges or the hurdles or the difficulties are not to be ignored. And then there's also, like, the shadowy side of that is the stuff that maybe is harder to face or look at. I personally have learned now over many years that there might be something really important about my own capacity and ability to look at that shadow stuff. And the truth of it is that it's taken me many decades of my life to get more comfortable really going into those places. Um, and I don't think that that is unique to me, obviously. I think we all have our own shadows and our own wounds and kind of the harder places to dwell or to face. But I do think that there's something really powerful that we can connect with when we encounter other people who are willing to put it out there and say it in a way. Not to be like trauma dumpy, and not to be this kind of, like, I don't know, pandering to the voyeurs of pain, but instead to just, like, shift our relationship to it and our own sense of knowing ourselves, yes, and each other. So I'm going to jump now to this as, like, a way for me to be thinking about intimacy, because the shortest version of how to say this is that in the past several years, my own work of becoming more intimate with myself has also involved going much deeper into the shadowy parts of myself. And it has made me wonder, when I do that work alone in relationship with myself, what does it look like? Or what might it look like? What could it look like to share that with other people and let that be the space of also the realm in which we are able to connect? Again, not anything, like, super profound here, but there's kind of like, well, what are the parts of ourselves that we, like, are allow other people to see, or that we can be witnessed in by others too? I think that the reason why there's, like, this, like, poignancy and maybe a little bit more feeling of, like, ooh, that's delicate, is because the harder parts of ourselves that might feel wounded or deep or painful or shadowy are often some of the things that we either carry shame or otherwise, like, the negative social feelings around. And so sharing them with other people is, I believe, like, for many people, a much more heightened experience of vulnerability. Like, if I reveal this part to you, that piece is tender or it's delicate or there's still a wound there. And so the vulnerability is, like, now it feels risky that you might hurt me because I have now exposed this very tender part of myself to you. I've been thinking about vulnerability lately, for months, in a very kind of, like, pointed way. But in this way in particular, and I think this came up on therapy, where I was like, maybe it's not so much that it's hard to sit with some of those tender, wounded parts. At least it's not for me anymore. I'm, like, quite comfortable being in that space. So it's not that I feel vulnerable sharing that. But what becomes more obvious is that the vulnerability is, like, what are other people going to do with that? Do they have the skill or the capacity to meet me there? And I think that if we're really honest, that's probably more of what the fear is. It's not so much I'm afraid of this thing. I'll just speak for myself. It's not so much that I'm afraid of this truth about myself or this reality about my experience, but it's more that I am concerned about if other people will be able to hold that in a way that doesn't hurt again, you know? And so that immediately shifts this kind of energy and attention onto us collectively to be in intimate relationship with one another in the way that creates space for all of our parts, including the harder, more difficult, or pained parts, to be channels for which we can connect. That requires that we all develop our skills and capacity in being able to meet others there, including ourselves. So I don't mean to dwell on like the darkness right now. I think this is also true of like, it's easier and maybe more palatable to say like, be with people who love your weird, be with people who let your freak flag fly and encourage that. And then like, they're going to shine even more light on that. Yes, definitely. There's the corollary here that like, it's beautiful when you can be your weird, quirky, totally like bizarre self, like unmasked, uninhibited. And then you find people who are like, I love that about you. That's not embarrassing or that's not weird. It's actually just like, that's just who you are and I want more of that. Yeah. I think that's a much more enjoyable way to relate with people. And we can feel more seen and understood and all of that. And isn't it also kind of the same when it comes to like our harder parts or the parts that maybe are not so like bright and shiny in a goofy, silly, funny way, but are also very true and very real to who we are? And if people can be like, I see that and I love that about you too, or I can hold that with you and make space for that too, I just think that's just as important. But in either way, it's not so much that I'm saying like you better be that person or else I'm not going to feel comfortable sharing. Here's how I'm thinking about the work. I am getting more comfortable sharing because I am more intimate with myself on all these levels, the bright and shiny and the dark and shadowy. The vulnerability that I can understand now is coming from a place of being like, and what are other people going to do with that if I let that be exposed or if I bring that to the forefront and share that? I can't control the people. Nobody really can. But the reflection back on like, okay, so how do we be who we need makes it very apparent to me that I have the responsibility of becoming the kind of person who can hold that in other people too. I would hope that other people would be able to hold that space for me, but I need to be the one to for sure be able to do that. And a good place to start is with yourself. Like, can you embrace yourself? So this is so cliche. Like this is not, I'm not reinventing a wheel here. Like this is something that I think people understand. I do not like the adage of like, you can't love somebody until you can love yourself first. But I think that the insight there is that like, but if you literally don't know how to love, then how can you love somebody else? So loving yourself is a good way to practice learning how to love if that's a more viable or like manageable way to do it. I'm not sure. Anyway. Okay. We're at Friday. Okay, so something happened on Friday night. I'm still doing the update, like truly the week that I've been on. And maybe I'll do like a little pause for a second and say, I guess the reason why I decided to do this level of update, where I'm like actually going through the days of my process, is because I didn't have a lot of work to show for it. I didn't, do a For the Love of Strangers, and I didn't make all these pages, even though I wanted to. And I had this conversation actually on Sunday in Romancing the Revolution with someone where I was saying like, I haven't made pages to show for this, but the work that I've been doing over the past few days is some of the most intense work I've done in a very long time. And just for fun, I'll show you. Like, let me flash my notebook. I love it when I do this. Oh boy. Where are we? Oh god, I shouldn't have done it like this. Oh no. I feel so exposed. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Okay, so this is kind of where I started on Friday. I'm just showing you, like, don't pause this. But this is what happened on Friday into Saturday. Oh my god, that probably sounds horrible. The page is flipping. The point that I'm trying to prove here is that I wrote a lot. And I did a lot of work, but all in my notebooks. And not on pages. That was chaotic. It was so much chaos. But the reason why is because I had these super intense experiences where I was like, holy shit, this is giving me a whole lot of information and insight around intimacy. Hence, Insights on Intimacy, a work in progress, the name of this particular update. And part of what happened was on Friday night. So, blame it on the astrology? Probably. Maybe it was because of my, I don't know, intense dumping of all that social media content on Thursday that kind of like opened up something to me. Maybe it's just from the past few weeks of me opening up new parts of myself like on a very fast clip with a deliberate effort to do so. But I was shocked on Friday to find myself here in this room, sitting on the floor right here. And I did not anticipate to go into a very deep space of grief and anger and sorrow and surprise all around my grandmother. Now, this is a very personal share, and I won't go into so much of the detail, but I will say that like this particular experience was this sort of eruption of connection. I don't know what else to say other than, you know, sort of I just found myself on the floor and then found myself looking at the limited amount of personal artifacts that I have of hers. This poppy tablecloth looking like thing is actually the bed sheet, like her top sheet of her bed. And I always loved it as a kid, so I'm very grateful that I have it. But like I am surrounded by my grandmothers in this room. That's intentional. So on Friday night, I was in this room and ended up just like, I don't know, sinking to the floor. I was going through other papers or something and did not anticipate doing this like deep connection with my grandmother on my dad's side. But it happened. And what happened was this sort of uncontrollable, what did I say? Channeling. I don't know how to describe the experience, but a lot came through for me. And it was in turn like this torrent of complex emotions. Again, grief, rage, sorrow, sadness, mourning, appreciation, wonder, like, and part of it was that even though, let me kind of frame this up a little bit. I didn't encounter anything new about my grandmother in the sense that I didn't like, oh my gosh, this diary of hers that no one has ever read before. It wasn't like that because I've gone through everything that I have. It's such a limited amount of like material. But I had a new insight about her that night, which was like I was hearing her voice in my head and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, does she have a Texas accent? So my grandmother, who's been dead now for just over 2 years, I started to wonder, I'm like, is that an accent? And the way she spoke, was that an accent? And I like it was this like very bizarre moment of me being like, how did I never realize that? Because she has this slowness to her speech patterns. And she has a pretty deep voice for being this tiny little woman. And it just occurred to me that maybe the way that she spoke was because she was from Texas. And so anyway, that is what I am sharing because to me, there was this like really wild realization of like, oh my God, is it possible to become more intimate with a person without finding anything new out about them, but just because of the connections that we might make in terms of our understanding about them? And so I started to think about intimacy as this way of like, what is intimacy? I mean, I'm all over the place. I haven't even gone into the places that I thought I was going to talk about with these intimacy insights today. But as I'm thinking about intimacy, what makes us more intimate? What does it feel like to be more intimate? How do we do that in terms of a practice? What does that look like in terms of what we actually know about ourselves and each other? And how we know who we are, what is the role of intimacy in knowing who we are even. I think it's a pretty big one. This experience on Friday, among so much else, um, had me wondering about like the degree to which intimacy is really our capacity to see and understand somebody, which doesn't even have to happen face to face. It doesn't have to be through a dyad of sustained eye contact. Talk about parasocial in this moment, right? Where like it's not, we could be talking about spiritual planes now, but parasocial in the way that like I'm not actually having a physical reciprocal relationship with my grandmother when I came upon this possible new understanding about her. And I think that says something about the extent of possibility that can happen in parasocial relationships too, which is really more a testament to our ability and willingness to pay attention, to make the connections, to kind of weave together the meaning that affords us a deeper understanding of somebody based on our own will and willingness to pay attention and be attuned in that way. So, oh man, there's a lot to unpack from all of this, and I guess right now I'm looking at the time and realizing I did not get to what I thought I was going to get to at all. But maybe I'll start to kind of wrap this up by saying, personally, as I'm embarking on this ongoing project of developing an epistemology of intimacy myself, and walking the tightrope with my eyes wide open of possibly willing my own downgoing, I think that the question I'm sitting with right now is that there is something kind of fascinating and maybe a little heartbreaking and maybe optimistic or very, very much like the pill of cynicism of whether or not we can truly connect our way out of the potential hellscape that could get worse around us. Because I'm talking about like, there's power in connecting. There's something we can know by being close with each other that can give us new insights for how to be differently that can really be life-changing, if not life-saving, for all of us on a collective level. The stakes are high. The implications are super significant. But in all of that, I'm just sitting with this question for myself of like, if I put a lot out there, if I put so much on the internet, hours and hours of content, an hour and 15 minutes every Wednesday, if I were to increase this podcast and start sharing more information just to relieve this high pressure volume, velocity, and flow that I've got inside of me because the writing is not fast enough, what does that mean? What if I just have this current of outpouring that nobody engages with? That doesn't mean that there's any kind of level of intimate connection that comes from it. More just putting it all out there. The intimacy requires that other people have the capacity and even the conditions, the constitution internally and the conditions externally to be able to engage in a way that would make it meaningful. Let me give you one more example of how I think about this. I think a really beautiful and relatable analogy is just the sheer volume of writing that Bell Hooks has done. So a lot of people know of Bell Hooks, and many people would even say they've been deeply, profoundly influenced by her work and her writing. And I myself, in my experience, I have countless books of Bell Hooks that I haven't read because she wrote so fucking much. And when I refer back to The Wounds of Passion, which I do a lot because that was the last book of hers that I like really read and was like stunned by, I realized in reading Wounds of Passion, I was like, I don't know Bell Hooks. Even though the corest, most fundamental parts of myself, even as a philosopher or as a person who engages with theory or as a feminist thinker and a socially critical human who can say, you know, the hetero patriarchal white supremacist capitalist colonial systems That's not how she says it, but I botched that. But like, I know bell hooks and have been so fundamentally shaped by her work, and there's so much of her work that I do not know. That's strictly limited only through her books and her writing. Of course, I didn't know her as a person, even. I did not have a conversation with her. She never knew that I existed. And there's this like magnitude, the prolific quantity of her work, and then the ways that we individually, myself included, connect in and feel some sort of like meaningful association or shaping, association with or shaping by her writing is really just like the smallest bit of her life and her experience and her work. I don't know if that makes me sad. I don't know if that makes me optimistic. I don't know what it does, but there's something about this, I guess the metric of like volume and breadth and depth of what it means to be human and to have our full life experience, that if one person is that in touch with themselves enough to be so broad and so deep and so multifaceted, that to me creates this like wide open field of possible connection. And there's this I don't even know how to describe it, like discrepancy maybe, or chasm, to put it strongly, between what exists and then what other people can connect with. Again, I don't know if that makes me happy or sad. I don't know what the feelings are associated with that. And I don't know what it means in terms of the true mark of like evaluating intimacy. If all we're doing is being like, how intimate are you? If there's this much of a person and you know this much of them, we might say that's extremely intimate. If there's this much of a person and you know this much of a person, but that tiny little bit shaped so much of how you understand the world, then maybe that is a very profound form of intimacy too, at least a form of meaningful connection. And then if that person never knew that you existed at all, what does that mean in terms of the interplay of your lives? I guess all of this thought and processing is maybe just a way to give a little bit of foreshadowing for what I anticipate to be a really intricate unfolding of the epistemology of intimacy as it goes. I'm really setting myself up for something here. And I hope, if anybody is on the other end of all of this, I hope that maybe there's something interesting unfolding for you too. But there really is something about understanding the lack of control and influence that one can have about whether or not that pans out in any particular way. Man, I did not do what I thought I was going to do. Friday had a very intense emotional experience, thanks to my grandmother on my dad's side. And then on Saturday, I had an interesting day trying to recuperate from that. And I slept terribly. And then I'm just giving you a little bit more where I've been. Slept terribly, had a horrible night's sleep, like one of the worst in a very long time, that ended with me having a terrible nightmare. Now, I am going to end this. We're like approaching an hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes, and that's our time. But in terms of experience and intimacy and all that kind of stuff, I also am thinking about what our experiences are like in our dream worlds. So Sunday morning, I woke up jarred out of a nightmare that had a lot to do with my actual real life. And not only that, but waking up from this nightmare is part of my lived experience now, part of my waking life and my story from even just the past week. So here's the update. I had a nightmare. But the nightmare was something that was so deeply aligned with events of my actual life and experience from my childhood that I was like, wow, that's telling. And because I live alone, and spend a lot of time alone, both of these experiences to me had me in a space. I think I'm going to conclude this with a writing, because why not be a little bit more vulnerable in this space? So both scenarios, Friday night, intense, emotional, nearly cathartic experience related to my grandmother, and then Sunday morning, a very intense waking up from a nightmare that rooted back into my own life. Both of these events over the weekend for me were basically like digging new wells of insight around my own intimacy with myself, what I know about myself and how I can know that. And it did occur to me, I was like, if there was another person here in this particular moment witnessing all of this happening to me, if they had the capacity, the constitution, and the conditions were right for them to meet me there, that would have been a really powerful moment of revelation and disclosure and sharing. And I can imagine that it would have been a pretty intense experience through which a connection would have gotten deeper with someone. So now I'm going from parasocial to like, but if a person's really there and you're really in this relationship, isn't this the kind of stuff that bonds you too? Like the ways of showing up and learning about each other that are really sort of sometimes those moments that like crack open a whole new degree of like connection and knowing, or like you see another person really differently because this side of them got exposed and you were there for it. Like that's what I think can happen when we're in close proximity and like in that sort of more standard way of thinking about intimate connection. So on Friday night, when this happened, before I had similar analogous intensity on Sunday morning, but on Friday night, this is something that I ended up writing. So here we go. Imagine this. I wish you could see me right now. It's one of those rare, beautiful moments in life when something deeply emotional is happening, a powerful breakthrough. You'd hear me sobbing from the floor in the reflection room, and peeking around the door frame, you'd ask, "You okay?" Our eyes would find our way over the table of orange poppies draped across, like a sharp impersonation of my grandma's bed. They would journey across the profound chasm of human experience, and still we would manage to find each other with eye contact in a millisecond. I stay here in this dimension of sadness, grief, heartache, and longing, and I'm so happy you're here to join me. It's like talking to you through the liminal fog of a whole different plane. My head and soul has been raptured, but I can feel your hand, accept your unwavering gaze of love and wonder, curiosity and empathy. You want to know with a similar shadowy depth what's happening for and within me. And you could not predict what it is. But you are so courageous in your love for me, the unknown could never deter you from stepping into the spiritual haze with me too. I love you so much for it. I'm fully present in this moment and appreciating how much I want to share this singular moment with only exactly you. I'm thinking about intimacy a lot and how we know who we are. That's the phrasing that I did last year for the class that I made for the kids at the Cultural Enrichment Center in Fort Collins. And I really like that phrasing, how we know who we are. And I think it would also be like how we know who we are, not just ourselves, but also each other. And I guess there is a degree of sadness, or at least recognition, that while I do think it's quite possible to have profoundly intimate connections from a parasocial kind of dynamic, there is obviously something so powerful and important about having the intimate connections in the present as they are unfolding too. That's the kind of like, we are going through something together, or something just happened and you were there, and now that is part of our shared story. So anyway, that was Friday night. Of course, my dream on Sunday was intense. And ever since then, basically, I've been recovering from it. So I didn't make pages. I didn't have a social event. I didn't do anything public, but I've been working so hard, and I wanted to let that be kind of the gist of this particular update. Part of my working is I have been writing a lot, and I've been thinking a lot, and I've been giving myself space to really process, which is how I move, thankfully, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to do that. And so yesterday, I started to really think about the schema of how I can structure a different way of engaging in the epistemology of intimacy and developing it on multiple levels, regardless if or whether, someone like May Martin were to actually respond to me. But I am realizing just sort of how massive this project is really going to be, and how much it will require of me, myself, and the invitation is there for it to really involve other people too, which again, I know I can't control. So I'll probably talk more about that at some point, but in the meantime, I'm going to end this update by just saying, I think I've been thinking about this for months. I've been talking about it for months, and I feel like right now I'm just at a place where every day I'm starting to realize more and more like what it will really look like and what it will take for me to show up and do this. And I'm grateful that I've had 2.5 years worth of therapy to prepare for this. I'm also so grateful that I have people and friends and like the relationships in my life with folks who do see me and support me at this level. So it's not all just like a parasocial philosophical project. But I also I'm realizing, and maybe this is something that might be helpful for other people to hear too. One of the things that I grapple with in this is this challenge of committing so fully to this project, which feels a little precarious, I'm not going to lie. But it also feels a little bit like, how can I say, like, I want to say indulgent in the sense that, is it really what I should be doing? I know I've also expressed this before in these updates, this like sort of doubt of like, is this really what the world needs? And I'm just going to have to continue to lean into my own understanding of like, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, maybe I should be doing something very different with all of my time and energy and effort. But there's something important that like will not leave me, and it is this incredibly heavy gut feeling that also in some ways, like, to put it negatively, like harasses and haunts my mind every day, or is just so overwhelmingly present and constantly imbued in every conversation I have, or every movie that I watch, or every walk that I take. Like, there's certain kinds of voices and themes and questions and topics that will not leave me, and I think I'm finally at this stage of realizing they're not going to leave me, because that's just who I am. And so I guess I'm kind of like at this, it feels like a sort of pivotal moment of like fully letting into an embrace or an acceptance of, if this is my project, then I have to do it. And is it my project? Of course it's my project, because it is just this wildly complex, interwoven rope of my life that nobody else is going to do it but me. So I guess I have to, if I want anything to make, if I want to make sense of this complex rope of the weaving of my everything in my life, then I have to do it. And yeah, that might be an indulgent kind of project too. I actually have been thinking about that too. Like, what's the point of memoir, of telling our own stories? And how we tell our stories is really important as well. But, I said I was going to do this, and I feel like I have less and less of a choice as the months and the weeks and now the days continue going on. So here I am. This is the update. This is me telling you what happened this week. And don't be surprised if things get a little bit more wild and I end up sharing more, because there's a lot here that I'm trying to do, and I'm going to share it, I guess. At least that's the challenge in the project that I have set for myself. Okay, long update. Um, More will be happening in Romancing the Revolution, though that space might change. I don't know. I'm just gonna stop talking. I'm just gonna stop explaining, and I'm gonna say, hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you do, in the sea of content that I am putting out into the world, if you happen to hear or watch these particular words, know that I'm incredibly grateful. Thanks for being here. Okay, more soon.